Freddie Mercury was halfway through Bohemian Rhapsody at Wembley Stadium when a voice from backstage began singing the opera section with him. What happened next left 72,000 people in absolute silence, then tears. July 12, 1986, 7:47 p.m., Wembley Stadium, London. The air was electric, thick with the energy of 72,000 voices that had been singing along to every word for the past 90 minutes. Queen's Magic Tour was at its peak, and Freddie Mercury owned that stage like it was his personal cathedral. The lights dimmed as the opening piano notes of Bohemian Rhapsody began, and the crowd erupted into that familiar roar, the kind that makes your chest vibrate even if you're standing 100 yards away. In the VIP section, tucked into row G, seat 14, sat a woman who didn't belong there. Her name was Elena Rossi, 58 years old, a former opera singer from Milan who had once graced the stages of La Scala and the Royal Opera House. But that was 15 years ago, before the accident, before the surgery that had stolen her voice. The accident happened on March 3, 1971, during a production of La Traviata at the Royal Opera House. Elena had been singing Violetta, the role she'd been born to play, when a piece of stage rigging came loose during the third act. It missed her head by inches, but caught her throat, crushing her larynx. The doctors at St. Thomas's Hospital worked for 7 hours to save her life. They succeeded, but the voice, that crystalline soprano that had made her a rising star at just 28 years old, that was gone. 3 surgeries later, the best specialists in London told her the same thing. Scar tissue had formed around her vocal cords in a way that made operatic singing impossible. She could speak, she could whisper, but she couldn't project, couldn't sustain notes, couldn't access the upper register that had been her signature. The dream she'd carried since she was 6 years old, standing in her grandmother's kitchen in Milan, singing along to Puccini records, it died in that hospital room. Her husband left 6 months after the accident. "I married a singer," he told her, as if that was all she'd ever been. As if 15 years of marriage could be erased by damaged tissue and lost notes. Her agent stopped returning calls. The opera houses that had been fighting over her suddenly went silent. By 1972, Elena Rossi had disappeared from the music world entirely. Now she worked as a seamstress in a small shop in Soho, hemming costumes for West End productions. She'd touch the fabric of the gowns she'd once worn, and remember what it felt like to stand in the spotlight, to have thousands of people hold their breath waiting for your next note. Her dreams of singing had been reduced to memories she tried not to think about because thinking about them hurt too much. Elena had won this ticket through a radio contest she'd entered on a whim. "Name the opera references in Bohemian Rhapsody," the DJ had said. She'd called in, listed them all, the Scaramouche, the Galileo, the Figaro, and 2 weeks later, here she was. She'd taken the bus from Soho at 4:30 p.m., transferred twice, walked the last half-mile because she couldn't afford the parking. Her hands shook the entire journey, not from excitement, from grief. She'd been to see Queen perform once before, in 1974, when her voice was still golden, when she could still hit the high C that had once made critics weep. She'd stood in the back of the Rainbow Theatre and thought, that Freddie Mercury understands opera. He gets it. Now, 12 years later, she was here again, but everything was different. She was different. As Freddie's voice soared through the opening verses, Elena closed her eyes. The crowd around her sang every word, off-key and enthusiastic, and it made her smile despite the ache in her chest. Then came the opera section. "Galileo! Galileo!" And suddenly something happened that she couldn't explain. Her throat opened. Not metaphorically, physically. For the first time in 15 years, she felt that old sensation, the one where breath becomes sound, where intention becomes music. Without thinking, without permission from her damaged vocal cords, she sang, "Magnifico, oh, oh, oh." It came out clear, pure, powerful. The people around her turned, startled. A security guard 20 feet away looked up, but Elena didn't stop. She couldn't. The next line was building, and her voice was rising with it, and she felt like she was 25 again, standing on the stage at La Scala, when everything was still possible. Freddie stopped singing. Just stopped. Mid-verse. His mouth was open, his hand frozen on the microphone stand, and 72,000 people fell into the kind of silence you can feel in your bones. Even the band kept playing for a few seconds before Brian May looked over and saw Freddie's face, and then the music died too. Freddie turned slowly toward the side of the stage, searching. His eyes were wide, confused, like he'd heard something that wasn't supposed to exist. The crowd was dead silent now, every single person holding their breath, trying to understand what was happening. Elena realized what she'd done. Horror flooded through her. She'd interrupted Freddie Mercury. She'd ruined the song. "Don't stop," Freddie said into the microphone, his voice soft, almost trembling. "Whoever that is, don't stop." The stadium was so quiet you could hear the wind moving through the lights. Elena stood up. She didn't mean to. Her legs just moved. She was shaking, her face wet with tears she didn't remember crying, and she opened her mouth and sang the next line. "I'm just a poor boy. Nobody loves me." Her voice carried across the stadium like it was made of glass and gold, every note perfect, every word aching with 15 years of silence. Freddie's hand dropped from the microphone. He put it to his mouth. The stadium lights caught the tears on his face. "He's just a poor boy from a poor family," he sang back to her, his voice breaking on the last word. And then they sang together. Elena, standing in row G with 72,000 people staring at her, and Freddie Mercury on that massive stage, both of them crying, both of them giving everything they had to those impossible high notes, those soaring harmonies. The band picked up again, tentatively at first, then with full force. Brian's guitars sang. Roger's drums thundered. John's bass held it all together. When they hit "Nothing Really Matters," the entire stadium joined in, but softly, reverently, like they knew they were witnessing something sacred. The song ended. Freddie walked to the edge of the stage, squinting out into the darkness of the crowd. "Where are you?" he called. "Please, where are you?" Security was already moving toward Elena, but not to remove her, to help her. Someone grabbed her arm gently and said, "Come with us, now." They rushed her through corridors she didn't know existed, past dressing rooms and equipment cases, past crew members who stopped and stared, past walls covered with tour posters and set lists. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She could hear the crowd still murmuring, a low rumble of confusion and anticipation that sounded like distant thunder. Then suddenly she was backstage, standing in the wings, and Freddie Mercury was walking toward her. He was still breathing hard from the performance, sweat glistening on his face under the harsh backstage lights. His white tank top was soaked through, and he had a towel around his neck that he'd clearly forgotten about. The famous mustache, the dark eyes, the presence that filled stadiums, all of it was right there, 5 feet away from her, and getting closer. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at her, really looked at her, and Elena saw something in his expression that she hadn't expected. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't annoyance at the interruption. It was recognition, like he'd been searching for something his entire life and had just found it standing in the wings of his own concert. Then he did something nobody expected. He knelt down, Freddie Mercury in the middle of his own concert, in front of his band and crew, dropped to one knee and took both of Elena's hands in his. His hands were warm, trembling slightly, and he held hers like they were something precious, something fragile that might break if he wasn't careful. "What's your name?" he whispered. "Elena," she managed. Elena Rossi. Elena, where did you come from? Where have you been hiding that voice? She could barely breathe. The words came out in a rush, broken by tears she couldn't control. I was an opera singer. A long time ago, I had an accident, surgery. They said I'd never sing again. 15 years. It's been 15 years. Freddie's face changed. Something in his eyes broke open, a kind of pain that matched hers, a recognition of what it meant to lose the thing that defined you. He squeezed her hands tighter. And tonight? Tonight I don't understand. I haven't been able to make a sound like that for 15 years. I felt my throat open and I couldn't stop. I'm so sorry. I ruined your song. Ruined? He laughed, but it came out wet, choked. Elena, you just gave me the most beautiful moment of my entire career. Do you understand that? You brought something into that stadium that I've been trying to create for 20 years and never quite managed. You brought magic. He stood up, still holding her hands, and turned to his tour manager. Get her a microphone, he said. We're going back out there. Freddie, the set list. Forget the set list. 2 minutes later, Freddie walked back onto that stage with Elena Rossi beside him. The crowd's roar was deafening, but Freddie raised his hand and they went silent again. He'd trained them well over the years. When Freddie wanted silence, you gave him silence. This is Elena, he said into the microphone, his arm around her shoulders. 15 years ago, she lost her voice. Tonight, somehow, she found it again. And I think we should help her celebrate that. The applause was thunderous. Elena was crying again, openly now, and Freddie handed her a microphone with a smile that could break your heart and put it back together in the same moment. Do you know Who Wants to Live Forever? He asked her, soft enough that only she could hear. She nodded. Of course she knew it. She'd listened to it 100 times in her tiny flat in Soho, wishing she could sing along. Then sing it with me. For the next 4 minutes, Freddie Mercury and Elena Rossi sang together on the Wembley Stadium stage, and 72 Iwaziran people became witnesses to something that felt less like a concert and more like a miracle. Her voice was crystalline, operatic, soaring over Brian's guitar like it had been written for her. Freddie watched her the entire time, harmonizing with her, supporting her, his eyes never leaving her face. When the song ended, he hugged her. Not a quick, polite hug. A real one. Thank you, he whispered into her ear. Thank you for reminding me why we do this. He took off the scarf he'd been wearing, the yellow silk one he'd worn for the entire UK leg of the tour, and tied it gently around her wrist. Keep this, he said, and don't you ever stop singing again. But here's the part that nobody expected. The part that still gives people chills when they hear it. 6 months later, Elena Rossi walked into the Royal Opera House for an audition. December 15, 1986, 2:00 p.m. The same building where her career had ended 15 years earlier. The same hallways she'd walked through on that terrible night when the ambulance had taken her away. She'd avoided this place for over a decade, couldn't even walk past it without feeling sick. But here she was, clutching her audition sheet, wearing the yellow scarf tied around her wrist like a talisman. She'd been terrified to try, convinced that Wembley had been a fluke, a one-time miracle that would never happen again. For weeks after the concert, she'd barely dared to hum in her apartment, afraid that trying to sing would prove it had all been a dream. But she thought about Freddie's words. Don't you ever stop singing again? And she went anyway. The audition panel sat in the darkness of the empty theater. 3 shadowy figures at a table, their faces invisible. The artistic director, Antonio Morelli, called out, Miss Rossi, when you're ready. She'd chosen the aria deliberately, the one she'd been singing the night of the accident, the one that haunted her dreams. If she was going to do this, she was going to face it head on. She opened her mouth. For 3 seconds, nothing came out. 3 seconds that felt like 3 years. The panel shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. Then, Nessun dorma. Her voice filled that opera house like it had been waiting 15 years to come home. Every impossible note, every soaring phrase, every ounce of pain and loss and hope she'd carried for a decade and a half, it all poured out in 4 minutes of pure, perfect sound. When she finished, the silence was absolute. Then Antonio Morelli stood up, walked down the aisle into the light. He was crying. "Where have you been?" he asked. "Waiting," she said simply. They hired her on the spot. For the next 8 years, until Freddie died in 1991, she performed in opera houses across Europe. She sent him a letter after every performance, and he wrote back every single time. Short notes, usually just a few lines. "Saw your review in the Times. Magnificent. Keep soaring. F." When Freddie passed away, Elena was singing at La Scala in Milan. She was in the middle of the second act when someone came backstage with the news. She finished her performance. Freddie would have wanted that, but at the curtain call, she held up the yellow scarf she still wore on her wrist, and everyone in that Italian opera house understood immediately. They gave her a standing ovation that lasted 11 minutes. She established the Mercury Rossi Foundation in 1992, dedicated to helping performers who'd lost their voices to injury or illness. Over the next 2 decades, the foundation helped 847 singers recover and return to the stage. In the lobby of their headquarters in London, there's a photograph. Freddie and Elena on that Wembley stage, both of them mid-note, both of them crying, both of them free. Elena Rossi passed away in 2018 at the age of 90. She was buried wearing that yellow scarf. At her funeral, they played a bootleg recording someone had made of that Wembley performance. Grainy, imperfect, but you can hear everything. You can hear the moment her voice returned. You can hear Freddie stop singing. You can hear 72 Zerozeran people holding their breath. And at the end, after the final note, you can hear Freddie whisper something that the microphone barely picked up. There you are. That night at Wembley wasn't just about a concert or a song. It was about what happens when we remember that every single person carries something inside them that the world needs to hear. It was about how sometimes the most extraordinary moments come from the most unexpected places. It was about how kindness can literally restore what was lost. Freddie Mercury could have ignored that voice in the crowd. He could have kept singing, could have treated it as a distraction, could have had security remove her. Instead, he stopped everything. He listened. He invited her into his light. And in doing so, he gave her back something everyone said was impossible to reclaim. That's the legacy. Not just the music, not just the performances, not just the records sold. It's the yellow scarf worn at every opera performance. It's the 847 voices that learn to sing again. It's the reminder that sometimes all it takes is one person to stop and say, "I hear you. Don't stop. Keep singing. Satur." If this incredible story of Freddie's compassion and the power of one unexpected moment moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about the magic that happens when we truly listen to each other. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone's kindness changed everything? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the heart behind music's greatest legends.